The plane shuddered gently as it touched down on the snow-dusted runway of Tromsø airport. Elena pressed her face against the small window, her breath fogging the glass as she caught her first glimpse of the Arctic landscape. Mountains loomed in the distance, their jagged peaks softened by a thick blanket of white. The sky, pale and streaked with the soft pink hues of the perpetual twilight, seemed almost otherworldly. As she stepped off the plane, the icy air hit her like a shockwave, biting through her wool coat and sending a shiver down her spine. It was bracing, but it was exactly what she had hoped for, a jolt to remind her she was somewhere entirely new, somewhere she could leave the tangled mess of her past behind. Elena adjusted the knitted gray scarf around her neck and tugged her beanie down over her dark brown curls, which stubbornly peeked out in defiance. Her reflection in the airport window as she passed caught her off guard, her cheeks already flushed from the cold, her almond-shaped hazel eyes betraying the nervous excitement she felt. She had dressed for warmth, not style, layering thermal leggings under a pair of practical jeans, a heavy parka with faux fur trim, and sturdy snow boots. Yet, there was an elegance to her even in this utilitarian outfit. Elena had always carried herself with a quiet confidence, though in the last year that confidence had frayed. It had been a long time since she'd felt beautiful, or even seen. As she pulled her suitcase across the polished floor of the terminal, she allowed herself a deep breath. This was her chance. Her decision to book this trip had been impulsive, spurred by the sharp sting of an ended relationship and the lingering weight of her own discontent. For months she'd felt trapped in the repetitive cycle of her life in Madrid, teaching, grading papers, attending obligatory social events, where she smiled politely and spoke little of herself. She had felt smaller with each passing day, like she was folding inward, becoming someone she no longer recognized. But here, in Tromsø, under skies that promised an elusive dance of green light, she hoped to find something she couldn't quite name. Peace, perhaps, or clarity, or maybe just the courage to stop looking backward and start moving forward. As she exited the terminal, the cold intensified, and a sharp wind whipped her face. Yet she couldn't help but smile. In the distance she could see the faint glow of the town's lights reflecting on the water, framed by the towering, snow-capped peaks. It was breathtaking. It felt like a place where something could begin. Elena pulled her coat tighter, gripping the handle of her suitcase with gloved hands. She didn't know what awaited her here, but for the first time in a long while she felt the whisper of hope. The taxi's heater hummed softly as Elena leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window. Outside, the landscape rolled by in a wash of white and gray, interrupted only by clusters of red-roofed houses and the occasional stretch of deep blue water. The world here felt vast and untamed, unlike the crowded streets of Madrid, and she found herself both awed and unnerved by its emptiness. As the driver navigated the icy roads, Elena's thoughts began to drift, unbidden, to Javier. She had met him 5 years ago at a charity event for one of her school's community projects. He had been magnetic from the moment he walked into the room, his dark hair neatly combed, his suit tailored to perfection, and a smile that seemed to light up the space around him. Javier had exuded confidence, the kind of man who moved through life like it was made to accommodate him. When their eyes met across the crowded room, it was as though the rest of the world fell away. He approached her with an ease that left her breathless. "Do I need to donate twice to get a dance with you?" he had asked, his voice rich with amusement. She had laughed, shaking her head. "Once will do, if you promise not to step on my feet." Their first dance had been the beginning of what Elena once thought was her forever. Javier was everything she believed she wanted: charming, ambitious, endlessly attentive. He would surprise her with little gestures, a coffee waiting on her desk at work, a handwritten note tucked into her bag. He made her feel seen, as though every moment with her was an adventure he couldn't wait to embark on. The first 2 years had been bliss. They had traveled together, Paris, Rome, Lisbon, and dreamed about a future full of shared adventures. Javier spoke of marriage, children, and a house by the sea where they could grow old together. Elena, swept up in his vision, had believed every word. But somewhere along the way, the cracks began to show. Javier's ambition, once so intoxicating, became a relentless drive that left little room for her. His work hours grew longer, his texts shorter. The thoughtful gestures became fewer and far between. He began to cancel plans, always with a smooth apology that left her feeling unreasonable for being upset. At first, she told herself it was temporary. That work was simply demanding more of him. But then came the arguments, sharp and cutting, where his once kind words turned into accusations. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," he would say, his voice tight with frustration. Or worse. "Maybe, if you had bigger goals, you'd see where I'm coming from." The breakup had been as painful as it was inevitable. One evening, after yet another canceled dinner and another empty apology, Elena had confronted him. "I feel like I'm disappearing in this relationship, Javier," she had said, her voice trembling. He had sighed, looking at her with something that resembled pity. "I don't know what you want from me, Elena. I can't be everything all the time." And in that moment, she realized that she had been holding on to a version of him that no longer existed, perhaps never had. The man she loved had become a stranger, and she was no longer willing to lose herself trying to keep him. It ended quietly, without screaming or slammed doors. He had packed a bag, kissed her on the cheek, and walked out of her apartment with a calm finality that left her hollow. Now. As the taxi approached her hotel, Elena blinked against the sting of tears. The ache of losing Javier had dulled over time, but the weight of it still lingered, a faint bruise on her heart. She had come to Tromsø to let that bruise fade completely, to find herself again in the silence of the Arctic skies. The car slowed to a stop in front of a small, charming hotel with wooden eaves and glowing windows. Elena exhaled, steeling herself against the cold as she stepped out into the crisp evening air. This was a new beginning, she reminded herself, a chance to rewrite her story. The hotel's lobby was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the icy air outside. The soft glow of amber lights reflected off wooden beams, and the scent of pine lingered faintly in the air. A fire crackled in a stone hearth near the corner, and Elena found herself momentarily comforted by the cozy atmosphere. Behind the reception desk stood a young woman with auburn hair tied neatly into a braid. She greeted Elena with a warm smile, her Nordic accent lilting and pleasant. "Velkommen to Tromsø. You must be Elena," the receptionist said, glancing at the computer screen. "We've been expecting you. How was your journey?" Elena smiled politely, shrugging off her coat. "Cold but beautiful. This is my first time this far north." The receptionist chuckled as she handed over a keycard. "Well, you're in for a treat. Room 205, just up the stairs. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Elena murmured her thanks and made her way to her room, dragging her suitcase behind her. The room was simple but charming, with soft cream-colored linens on the bed and a large window overlooking the snow-covered rooftops of the town. A small desk held a folded map of Tromsø, and a plush armchair sat invitingly by the window. She let out a sigh and sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her lap. As she gazed out at the falling snow, doubt began to creep in again. She had dreaded the idea of traveling alone, the empty space beside her on the plane serving as a constant reminder of the life she thought she'd have. It had been Sophia, her best friend, who had insisted she take this trip. "You need to get out of that apartment, Elena," Sophia had said, her voice firm. "Go somewhere new, see something extraordinary. You've been stuck for too long." At the time, Elena had agreed reluctantly, convinced that she'd spend the entire trip feeling awkward and out of place. Now, sitting alone in her quiet hotel room, she wondered if Sophia's well-intentioned push had been the right one. But no, she wouldn't give in to the doubt. She hadn't come all this way just to wallow in her thoughts. Rising from the bed, she brushed her hair back into a ponytail and straightened her scarf. The flicker of hesitation in her chest was replaced with determination. Back in the lobby, the receptionist looked up from her desk, her smile as welcoming as before. "Hi," Elena said, stepping forward. "I was wondering, do you have any guided tours for the Northern Lights? I'd really like to see them while I'm here." The receptionist's face lit up. "Oh, absolutely. There are several options depending on what you're looking for. We have a group tour leaving tonight. Or if you'd like something more private, there's a local guide who specializes in finding the best spots." Elena hesitated, weighing the options. "I think a group tour would be good, for tonight at least." She thought it might be easier to blend into a crowd, to feel less conspicuously alone. "Perfect," the receptionist said, jotting something down on a notepad. "The bus will pick you up just outside the hotel at 8:30. I'll get you booked in right away." "Thank you," Elena said, managing a small smile. As she headed back to her room, she felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. Not quite excitement, but a step toward it. Maybe Sophia had been right after all. Maybe this trip was exactly what she needed. Back in her room, Elena laid her jacket on the chair by the desk and carefully pulled out the clothes she planned to wear for the tour. Practical, warm layers, a thermal shirt, a fleece pullover, and waterproof pants. She added her thick knitted scarf and gloves to the pile, along with her favorite wool hat, the one Sophia had teased her about for being too oversized. Satisfied with her choices, she glanced at the clock on the bedside table. Still plenty of time. The room felt too quiet, and her body heavy with the lingering exhaustion of travel. A nap, she decided, would help her enjoy the evening more. She stretched out on the bed, her thoughts drifting as she stared at the snowflakes dancing outside her window. What did she hope for tonight? To see the Northern Lights, of course. That was the obvious answer. She imagined standing under the open sky, the green and violet ribbons of light swirling above her, a moment of pure awe and wonder that might make her feel whole again. But deeper than that, she hoped for something she couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the connection Sophia had spoken about, the idea that being in a place so grand, so different, might remind her of who she really was. Maybe it was just the hope of feeling something other than lost. Her eyes fluttered shut, and sleep claimed her before she could think further. When she woke, the room was bathed in the soft gray of evening, and her heart sank as she glanced at the clock. 8:26. "Oh no," she muttered, leaping off the bed. She threw on her clothes with shaking hands, pulling her jacket on as she grabbed her hat and scarf, stuffing them over her disheveled curls. Her boots weren't even laced properly as she stumbled out the door and down the stairs, her breath quickening with every step. By the time she reached the lobby, she was slightly out of breath, cheeks flushed from both the rush and the mortifying thought that the group might have left without her. To her relief, a small cluster of people stood near the door, bundled in winter gear and chatting among themselves. At their center was a tall man with broad shoulders, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. His laugh, a deep, warm sound, cut through the cold air, and Elena felt a sudden, inexplicable flutter in her chest. The man turned as he noticed her, his sharp blue eyes locking on her instantly. His features were striking, chiseled jawline, stubble just thick enough to suggest he hadn't bothered shaving for a day or two. His blonde hair was tousled beneath a simple black beanie, a few strands escaping across his forehead. His jacket, slightly worn, hinted at someone who spent more time outdoors than in, and his boots were scuffed with the marks of well-traveled paths. "You must be Elena," he said, his voice carrying an amused lilt that made her blush. He extended a gloved hand toward her. "I'm Erik, your guide for the evening." Elena took his hand, noting how solid and warm it felt despite the gloves. "I'm so sorry I'm late. I lost track of time," she stammered. Eric's grin widened, his eyes glinting with mischief. "Lost track of time? On your first Northern Lights tour? Rookie mistake." He let the teasing linger for a moment before giving her a wink. "Lucky for you, we're still here, though I can't promise the Aurora waits for anyone." A ripple of laughter came from the group, and Elena managed a sheepish smile, though her cheeks were burning. As Erik turned back to the group to finish his instructions, Elena couldn't help but steal another glance at him. He was different from Javier, whose polished perfection often felt rehearsed. Erik carried himself with an easy confidence, his rough edges making him seem more real, more grounded. She told herself she was just noticing because he was her guide, and because she felt the pang of embarrassment from being late. But still, as they headed toward the waiting van, she couldn't shake the faint feeling that she'd already begun to notice him for other reasons entirely. The van was warm and smelled faintly of coffee and wool, a comforting contrast to the crisp air outside. Elena slid into a seat near the middle, grateful for a moment to collect herself. Beside her sat a woman bundled in a bright red jacket, her cheeks rosy from the cold. "Hi," Elena said, offering a small smile as she tugged off her gloves. "I'm Elena." The woman turned, her face lighting up with a friendly smile. "Nice to meet you. I'm Clara, from Austria. Is this your first time chasing the northern lights?" "Yes," Elena admitted, brushing a stray curl out of her face. "You?" Clara nodded enthusiastically. "Oh, absolutely. It's been a dream of mine for years. I've been checking the weather apps obsessively all day," she said with a laugh. "They say tonight's conditions are perfect." Elena smiled back, feeling some of her initial nerves ease. Clara's warmth was infectious, and for the first time since arriving in Tromsø, she felt a flicker of excitement stir in her chest. As the van began to move, Erik's voice rose above the soft hum of the engine. He stood at the front, one hand braced on the overhead rail, his tall frame swaying slightly with the motion of the vehicle. "Welcome, everyone," he began, his voice steady and confident with a playful undertone. "You've all made it to Tromsø, the Arctic capital of the world. Congratulations. You're officially as far north as most people ever dare to go." A ripple of chuckles moved through the group. Erik continued, his blue eyes scanning the faces in the van. "Tromsø is a unique place. We're sitting about 350 kilometers north of the Arctic Circle, and yet, because of the Gulf Stream, we don't freeze into solid ice every winter. Lucky for us, or unlucky, depending on how much you love shoveling snow." The group laughed again, and Elena found herself smiling despite her earlier rush. Erik's ease with the group was magnetic, his tone balancing between informative and entertaining. "But I know you didn't come here for a weather report," Erik said, his grin widening. "Let's talk about why you're really here, the Aurora Borealis." The van grew quiet, everyone leaning slightly forward as Erik's voice dropped into a more reverent tone. "First, a bit of science, so you can impress your friends back home," he said, his eyes twinkling. "The aurora happens when charged particles from the sun collide with the Earth's atmosphere. Those collisions release energy in the form of light, and the result is, well, magic. Green is the most common color you'll see tonight, but if we're lucky, we might catch some pinks and purples too." Elena glanced out the window, where the dark sky seemed endless. She imagined it painted with vibrant, swirling ribbons of light, and her breath hitched slightly at the thought. Erik's voice pulled her back. "Tonight we're heading to a special spot. It's a cliff overlooking the ocean, one of my favorite places to watch the aurora. The view is spectacular, and it's far enough from the city lights that you'll get a truly clear sky." He paused, letting the words settle over the group. "There's also a cabin nearby," he added with a grin. "We'll have warm drinks and snacks waiting for you inside if the cold starts to bite." The group murmured in approval, and Elena felt her anticipation grow. A cliff overlooking the ocean, with the northern lights dancing above. Could it really be as magical as it sounded? As the van wound its way through the darkened roads, Erik sat back in the driver's seat, leaving the group to their thoughts. Clara nudged Elena gently. "Doesn't he make it sound like something out of a fairy tale?" Elena nodded, her gaze fixed on the faint outline of mountains against the night sky. "Let's hope it is." The van crunched to a halt on a snow-packed road, and the group spilled out into the frigid night air. Elena pulled her scarf tighter around her neck as she looked around, her breath catching at the sight before her. The cliff rose like a sentinel above the bay, its edge sweeping down to meet the dark waters of the fjord below. In the distance, mountains framed the horizon, their snow-dusted peaks glowing faintly under the dim starlight. The cabin stood nearby, its rustic wooden walls bathed in the warm, flickering light of lanterns hanging on the porch. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, promising warmth within. The scene felt like a postcard brought to life, so perfect it almost seemed staged. "Oh, wow," Clara murmured beside her, echoing Elena's thoughts. The other guests voiced similar admiration as they took in the grandiose view, cameras already snapping to capture the moment. Erik stood a few paces ahead, his face illuminated by the glow of the cabin's lanterns. "Not bad, right?" he said, his tone casual but his grin unmistakably proud. "This spot has never let me down." But as the group settled into the clearing, the mood began to shift. A thin veil of clouds rolled across the sky, slowly thickening until the stars were all but obscured. Whispers of disappointment passed through the group like ripples on a pond, and Elena felt her heart sink. "It's just our luck," someone muttered, zipping their coat higher. Erik, overhearing, clapped his gloved hands together. "Hey, hey, don't give up on me yet," he said, his voice buoyant. "The Aurora has a way of surprising you. All we need is a little patience." His easy confidence settled over the group, and Elena couldn't help but feel reassured, though doubt still lingered. While they waited, Erik busied himself with starting a campfire. Within minutes, flames leapt to life, crackling merrily and casting a warm glow over the clearing. He returned with a tray of steaming mugs, filled with what smelled like spiced tea and hot chocolate, and passed them around. "Here you go," he said as he handed Elena a mug, his smile easy and genuine. "Something to keep you warm while you wait." "Thank you," she said softly, cradling the mug in her hands. Its warmth seeped through her gloves, chasing away the chill. As the group began to mingle around the fire, Elena found herself drawn to Erik, who stood a little apart, adjusting a log in the flames. Summoning her courage, she stepped closer. "Do you ever get tired of waiting for the lights?" she asked, her breath misting in the air. He turned, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "Never," he said simply. "The Aurora teaches you something important. Patience. You can't control it, can't force it. All you can do is show up and be ready when it decides to appear." Elena tilted her head, intrigued. "That sounds profound for something as unpredictable as the weather." Erik chuckled, shaking his head. "It's not just the Aurora. Nature doesn't rush, doesn't bend to anyone's schedule. It's a good reminder that maybe we shouldn't either. I think that's why I love it out here. It pulls you out of yourself, makes you see the bigger picture." His words struck a chord, and Elena found herself staring into the fire, his voice echoing in her mind. She thought of Madrid, of how fast life always seemed to move there, of how she had felt like she was running just to keep up, even when she wasn't sure where she was going. "You're really patient," she said after a pause. "I don't think I've met anyone who respects the waiting, if that makes sense." Erik shrugged, his grin crooked. "I've learned that the best things happen when you're not in a rush to find them." For a moment, silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. Elena sipped her tea, letting his words sink in. She admired the way he seemed so at ease, so connected to this rugged world. It was a stark contrast to the frantic pace of her own life, and she found herself wondering what it would be like to see the world through his eyes. The sound of laughter brought her attention back to the group, who were swapping stories around the fire. Erik glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "You're here, Elena. Take it all in, every moment. You never know what you might find." As the clouds above began to shift, revealing slivers of starlight, Elena felt something inside her begin to shift as well. For the first time in what felt like ages, she allowed herself to hope, not just for the Aurora, but for whatever this journey might bring.